Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. We are going to begin shortly as I introduce our center and our webinar speaker for today. We're really happy to have you here with us. So again, welcome to today's webinar, Understanding the Basics of DBT, a 4-part foundational skills series. This webinar is sponsored by the Northeast and Caribbean Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, or MHTTC, and we're housed at Rutgers in the School of Health Professions in the Department of Psychiatric Rehabilitation and Counseling Professions. My name is Kati, and I'm the project coordinator of this center, and we'll be introducing our speaker today. Next slide, please. The MHTTC is funded by SAMHSA, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, to enhance the capacity of the behavioral health workforce to deliver evidence-based and promising practices to individuals with mental health conditions. We also address the full continuum of services spanning mental illness prevention, treatment, and recovery supports. Next slide, please. We also offer training programs on evidence-based practices for serious mental health conditions, wellness and recovery for providers and people with mental health conditions, school mental health, and comprehensive multi-tiered services and support, Hispanic and Latinx mental health education, online education courses, specifically Wellness Matters, Illness Management and Recovery, Functional Thinking, and more. Next slide, please. As a reminder, all of our training programs featured on your screen, as well as our products and services, are available to you at no cost. Next slide. If you're interested in staying up to date with the events and products the Northeast and Caribbean MHTTC is providing, we ask that you please sign up to receive our email communications. You may do so by scanning the QR code provided on the screen, and I will also share a direct link in the chat box. Following the webinar, you'll be asked to complete a brief survey. We value this feedback and use it to improve our activities and inform future activities. These surveys are also important because our continued funding is linked to them. So we thank you in advance for your participation. We also want to let you know that this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our website along with our presenter slides and any relevant resources within 7 days of this webinar broadcast. At the time of this presentation, Marian Delphin Rittman served as Acting Assistant Secretary for Mental Health and Substance Use at SAMHSA. The opinions expressed herein are the views of the speakers and do not reflect the official position of the Department of Health and Human Services or SAMHSA. No official support or endorsement of DHHS or SAMHSA for the opinions described in this presentation is intended or should be inferred. We encourage you to interact with our presenter during the webinar by using the chat feature. Please post any comments or questions you have in the chat, and I will collect your questions as we go and ask them of the presenter during the Q&A portion towards the end of the presentation. During the webinar, our presenter may pose questions to you, so please use the chat feature to answer them. As a reminder, the MHTTC network is committed to using affirming, respectful, and recovery-oriented language in all its products and activities. Next slide, please. We wanted to let you know that the new 3-digit dialing code for the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is now available through 988. 988 is not just a suicide crisis line. It is for people experiencing a suicidal, mental health, or substance use crisis of any kind or any kind of emotional distress. It's also for people who are concerned about someone experiencing a crisis. You can connect by calling or texting 988, or you can chat online at 988lifeline.org. Calls, texts, or chats are responded to by a trained crisis counselor. Now let's begin our webinar. We have Crystal Socha with us today. Crystal is a PhD candidate and senior training and consultation specialist at Rutgers School of Health Professions in the Department of Psychiatric Rehabilitation and Counseling Professions. Crystal's primary role includes providing in-person and remote training, consultation, and technical assistance to New Jersey agencies that provide community support services. She has over 10 years of experience in the behavioral health field, delivering trauma-informed, culturally responsive, gender-affirming care and supporting individuals in building a life worth living. Before joining Rutgers, she provided community-oriented services in supportive housing, intensive in-home and in-community settings, community mental health centers, integrated primary care, hospital systems, and private practices. She has received a 40-hour foundational training in dialectical behavioral therapy by a Linehan Board certified clinician and utilizes a DBT-informed approach within her work as a counselor. Again, I want to welcome everyone, and I'll turn it over to Crystal.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the warm welcome. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are located. Thank you so much for joining me today. As Kati mentioned, I am covering the understanding the basics of DBT, a 4-part foundational skills series. And today is just part 1. So thank you for being here. I hope that you'll join us for session 2, 3, and 4. Thank you for also letting me know where you are joining us from, as well as your role. So today we'll be covering just the introduction to DBT, as well as strategies for mindfulness. So let's get started. We've got a lot to cover today. As far as learning objectives, just so you get a sense of what we'll be covering today, we are going to identify DBT's history, framework, and treatment structure, highlighting some of the key components of DBT, including mindfulness, emotion regulation, distress tolerance, and interpersonal effectiveness. We'll take a moment to understand some mindfulness strategies and their importance in DBT. This is not comprehensive by any means. I hope that this serves as a foundational component for you and hopefully makes you interested in DBT and wanting to learn more. So this will kickstart your learning process, or maybe reinforce what you've already learned so far, or validate the things you know about DBT. And if we have time, we'll review a case study to apply some mindfulness skills with your clients. So what is DBT on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being not familiar at all, 10 being you're extremely familiar, you're an expert, you can do this presentation as well. Where do you land on this scale? And there's so many of you, so I'm seeing numbers come in. That's great. All right. We're across the whole spectrum. Wonderful. All right. So we've got a whole mix of us here. And again, thank you for doing that. Again, hoping that this serves as a kickstart to your learning, a reinforcement of your learning, a desire to learn more. Again, this is not everything you need to know about DBT, but we'll start with some important pieces of it. So when we're looking at DBT, I'll talk a little bit about what it is and criteria in the beginning, as well as some foundational components. So dialectical, of course, the D in DBT means dialectical. And a dialectic really is this synthesis of opposites. So this combination of both acceptance and change, and this idea that opposites can coexist. And Marshall Linehan, who we'll talk about, created DBT, realized that there was too much focus on validation or the acceptance piece, and too much focus either on the opposite end for change and being solution focused and wanting clients to engage in the next step to achieve their goal. But clients felt invalidated on both ends of the spectrum. So she found that treatment lowered symptoms, but not suffering. And dialectics really tell us that clients need both validation as well as they need to be taught skills. So they need that acceptance piece and they need that change piece. The B stands for behavior, and we know that there is a behavioral component in this approach. So this means that we really need to assess the situations that our clients are in order to make sure that we figure out their goals, we're able to help them problem solve, and they're able to then problem solve on their own, and give them the hope that behaviors can change, and behaviors do serve a function. They're not random. The T for therapy. So this again includes a combination of individual therapy, group therapy. We'll talk a little bit about the structure, and really is a comprehensive evidence-based treatment. It is possible to be treated for many conditions, and we'll talk about that in just a moment as well. But again, the key piece here, or the takeaway, is that it focuses both on acceptance strategies, which include mindfulness and distress tolerance. We'll talk a little bit about that, as well as those change strategies, so emotion regulation and interpersonal effectiveness. So some of the history when we're talking about DBT was really developed in the mid to late 19th century by Dr. Marcia Linehan as she was studying suicide or suicidal behavior. And we later found out that she also was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. And so this was really intended to be supported for people who were focused on behavior change, but then she discovered that CBT, or that behavior change alone, was not working as well as it was intended for people with borderline personality disorder. And people who were only using a CBT or behavioral approach, these clients felt misunderstood, criticized, invalidated. They often left treatment early. So DBT then transitioned and currently combines both aspects of CBT as well as mindfulness and a humanistic approach to really emphasize change and validation of the client. So although it was originally started and created for people with borderline personality disorder, it is applicable to many populations. So what are some of the populations that you all serve, or perhaps if you're a student, populations that you hope to work with? Let me know in the chat. See, opiate use, severe persistent mental illness, seeing different levels of the developmental spectrum, substance use trauma, children's system of care. There's so many of you here. I feel like it's just one big hug in this room. So keep in mind, wherever you are, DBT is applicable to many populations, as well as for many people with a variety of diagnoses. And oftentimes these diagnoses do overlap or coexist with borderline personality disorder. And researchers also found that DBT is effective regardless of a person's age, sex, gender identity, sexual identity, race, ethnicity. So very applicable across the spectrum. And when we look at criteria for DBT, this varies program to program, but in general, people really must be experiencing intense symptoms. These symptoms might look like flashbacks, high anxiety, mood lability, dissociation, where they might not benefit from a traditional process group, and maybe they need additional structure. This person might also have a history of repeated substance use, suicide attempts, self-injurious behavior, and hospitalizations. This person might be deemed high risk and require some extra support in daily check-ins. This person might also have deficits in 2 or more modules, and we'll talk about those 4 modules of DBT. But this person might experience mood lability, impulsiveness, cognitive dysregulation, interpersonal chaos. And they must meet criteria or have features of borderline personality disorder. And people with borderline personality disorder, as we know, often have a history of sexual abuse that is repeated and severe. They may have a history of childhood neglect. Their parents might also suffer or experience mental health conditions. They may also experience emotion dysregulation. They may experience interpersonal dysregulation, so unstable relationships. They may experience behavioral dysregulation, so non-suicidal self-injurious behavior, self-harm, self-damaging, impulsive behaviors. They can also experience cognitive dysregulation, so some of those black or white thinking patterns, as well as self-dysregulation. So they have this unstable sense of self-image, this kind of chronic feeling of emptiness. And I find it so helpful to educate individuals, especially if they have a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder, so that they don't feel alone. There's something to label this experience that they're going through. They feel a sense of empowerment. They can name this experience. And so the structure of DBT in its traditional format generally takes about 6 months to a year or more. Each module could take up to 6 weeks, but each program again runs differently. If you are working at a program or hope to work at a program that is DBT adherent or DBT informed, they may include some of the following. So you'll have weekly outpatient individual psychotherapy with this person. This person will also attend weekly outpatient skills groups. There's between session phone coaching, which really just serves as a way for the client to identify what's happening for them, describe skills that maybe they've already tried, and now you are working with this person to encourage and suggest new skills to try. And then the client agrees to try the skills on their own. And to mention as well with the group skills groups, what we really want to highlight is that often the format of these groups work with having kind of this beginning ritual or mindfulness exercise. You're then reviewing skills that maybe were covered in the past. You are providing education on a new skill, and this can happen multiple days a week, thinking about partial care programs or intensive outpatient programs, and always includes a homework review session. So clients are actively working on practicing skills on their own outside of the group session. Therapists who are involved in DBT or work at a DBT informed program or DBT adherent program, do engage in weekly therapist consultation meetings. So being able to connect with each other for support, as well as pharmacotherapy or medication management is provided. And so I'll talk a little bit about some of the framework of DBT. The foundation of DBT really lies in being as skillful or as effective as possible. And so they're really a set of skills that are grouped together to achieve a specific goal. And we'll talk about those modules again. But skills can be either effective or ineffective. They can be adaptive or maladaptive. So really approaching this in this way so that we're not judging the behaviors of this person. We're simply noticing how skills are functioning for them. Thinking about, if someone is engaging in substance use, maybe it's not effective, it's an ineffective skill, but it's what they know and it's what's working for them. And we'll talk about mindfulness as really the foundation for all other skills. But biosocial theory really tells us how and why some people have so much difficulty with emotion regulation and behavior control. So this theory tells us that each of us are influenced by our genetics, which influences our behavior, which influences our environment, which then in turn we react to and influence us in this never-ending kind of transactional response or relationship over time. Emotional vulnerability is biological. Some people might experience emotions more often and more intense than others. Think about the clients that you have, or if you know anyone who has ever been told you're too sensitive, you're too emotional. This person has a really difficult time with navigating those emotions, which in turn makes it difficult to navigate those behaviors, but those behaviors are not random. Each emotion and each behavior has a function, and emotions allow us to communicate to ourselves and to others. But with that being said, an invalidating environment might also make it difficult to regulate emotions. So we've got this genetic piece happening, and then we've got the invalidating environment. So what comes to mind, and we'll talk about this on the next slide, when you think of an invalidating environment, what does that mean to you? And I'm a cat person, so you may visualize a sad cat. I know, doesn't this warm your heart? People who tell you your experiences are wrong, feelings are dismissed, not feeling heard, not valued. Sports, I see someone shared an example, being labeled as soft, which is invalidating. Others don't understand how you feel, not being taken seriously. Yeah. Dismissing thoughts, toxic environment. Okay, absolutely. So we'll talk about specifically, Marshall Linehan describes an invalidating environment as some of the following. So it's an environment that punishes expression of emotions, and you've given me some great examples already, especially in public. In private, this might look like a mother saying to a child, "Go to your room until you stop being angry." This may also include oversimplifying problem solving. So, have you ever heard someone say, and I'm sure you have, relax, just breathe, just smile? It says emotions are weird, wrong, or bad. So telling a child, that's such a dumb thing to say, or that's such a dumb thing to feel, denies or discounts an individual's personal emotional experience. So this might look like telling a child, you don't feel sad, you're angry. Nobody else would feel that way. Reinforces escalations of emotional responses. And this happens intermittently. So let's say a child is riding a tricycle or a bike, the child falls off the bike, is crying, is being ignored by a parental figure, until the screams are so loud that it's perhaps, quote, getting on the parent's nerves, that the parent then responds in this cold and stern manner, rather than initially responding to that first cry for help or that first feeling of sadness. And another one, so the last piece of this invalidating environment, it might be the environment says that emotions should be coped with without support. So if you're going to keep crying, go to your room and come down until you can get a control of yourself. So this person has to do this independently, figure out how to do it. And if you were never taught how to do this, how would you know how to do this as an adult? So this environment doesn't teach individuals how to label their emotions to help understand, what is that sadness? What is that anger? What am I experiencing? It doesn't allow for regulating emotions or trusting of experiences. So how could a person tolerate distress? How could a person problem solve? How could a person communicate effectively if this is all that they know? I'm seeing a lot of validation in the chat. It doubled down, yeah, someone said it doubles down on the negative feelings by saying deal with it, essentially. Absolutely. A lot of dismissing of feelings, yes. Right. And in DBT, it really is said that borderline personality disorder is a pervasive disorder of emotion regulation. And it results from the transaction of the invalidating environment, which we see here, as well as that biological or genetic dysfunction in the emotion regulation system. So again, really tying together what that biosocial theory means to understand that this person is experiencing suffering. The next piece I want to talk about is the framework within DBT, which again is that dialectical philosophy. Is anyone familiar with dialectics and what that means? Yes. Yes. Okay. So it really is almost the opposite of black and white thinking, staying away from extremes, where instead of either or, it's both and. It's kind of like brain yoga. You're balancing both sides to become more flexible. So if you're not familiar, dialectics again really just say that two opposing truths can be true at the same time. So you're helping clients to let go of that black and white thinking, that all or nothing thinking. And I'll ask you this, have you ever been around a group of people and still felt lonely? So dialectics might tell us you can be with others and still feel lonely. Some other examples might be you can be independent and still also want help. You can have a disagreement with somebody and still also be friends. You can not agree with what another person says and still be respectful towards them. So a synthesis of both perspectives, that both those things can be true. And keep that in mind as we move forward. So another piece that I want to cover is the DBT skills training assumptions. And if you have a DBT manual, you'll see that these are listed there for you. But assumptions are beliefs that cannot be proved. In DBT skills training, all group members, skills trainers, clinicians, therapists, and those involved in DBT are asked to abide by these assumptions. And so these assumptions really guide the experience of both the client and the clinician and the treatment team. And assumptions are not facts. So you'll see some of them here. People are doing the best that they can, and they can still do better, and they can still want to improve. People don't want to stay sick, and they aren't trying to make things hard. You may have clients that come in and say they're ready to change, and then you're finding yourself or them stuck in actually making this change possible. But a lot of what we emphasize in DBT is that clients cannot fail, ultimately. Sometimes they just don't have the skills to be effective. And so this can be done with our support. So Marsha Linehan shares an example. So thinking about if you are walking and someone pushes you into the river, you can either say, this is so unfair. You can give someone who's passing by, like, help, save me, this kind of look without actually saying any words. Or you can recognize, although you didn't cause that problem, you didn't push yourself into the river, you need to find a solution and you need to say what you need. So keep that in mind. And again, we'll share the presentation with you if you want to look at these in further detail, but these really guide the skills training and approach as you are working with clients. So some primary targets of DBT include this main overarching goal, which really focuses on building a life worth living. And so in order to help your clients achieve a life worth living, you want to help them focus on what they want, not what they don't want. So if they don't want to drink anymore, okay, so what does not drinking get you? What will you achieve if you no longer drink? Maybe this person wants to make friends. Maybe this person wants to build a relationship. Maybe this person wants a job. So what will happen if you stop drinking? What would you do if you could not fail? What behaviors are getting in the way of the goals that you have for yourself? And sometimes clients will say, well, there's no such thing. There's no point in living. I don't understand. I won't find it. And they're right. A lot of what we do in DBT is hard. It takes effort. It takes time. It takes practice. It takes commitment. And we are here to help this person identify what that life worth living might look like, so it can be helpful to set smaller goals in the interim. And so you'll see some additional targets here that really are important in DBT, but it really is all about helping people develop their own ability to use some of these skills within the modules that we'll talk about. And a lot of this, especially if you think about goal setting, or if you're working with clients, you know that much of it really is using motivational interviewing as a strategy to explore a person's readiness to change. So where do you hope to be in 6 months? How would you like things to be different? What do you think you'll have to lose or give up if you stop drinking or whatever it might be? So you'll see some other targets here, and a lot of what DBT focuses on is those life-threatening targets, which could include things like suicide attempts, self-harm, substance use, could also include eating disorder behaviors. So that's really some of the primary focus along with this life worth living goal. Therapy interfering really just means anything that gets in the way of the process. Is this person late to group all the time? Is this person not showing up to your appointments? Quality of life might mean unemployment, financial instability, impulsive spending, and then the skills acquisition. So what skills does this person need to be effective in achieving this life worth living? What does this person need to acquire in order to be successful? And so when we're identifying goals, we want to talk about behaviors to increase and behaviors to decrease. And this general goal of DBT really is to learn how to change your own behaviors, emotions, and thoughts that are linked to some of the problems that are contributing to this person's life, causing misery, causing suffering, resulting in distress. And so when you're working with someone on deciding some of these goals, you really want to explore, and there's a really great handout in the beginning of the manual that helps this person look at some of these behaviors on a piece of paper. Maybe they can acknowledge some of the things that they're really struggling with. So you are taking some time to explore some of these behaviors. So if this person experiences mindlessness, for example, being out of touch with reality, kind of feeling like they're on autopilot, a sense of emptiness. The piece that we want to incorporate into this person's life are those mindfulness skills. So we're increasing some of those skills deficits areas. If a person experiences interpersonal conflict and stress, perhaps loneliness, we want to increase those interpersonal effectiveness skills. If this person has extreme, intense, kind of up and down emotions, maybe difficulty in regulating emotions, that's where that emotion regulation skills module comes in. And then for those who are struggling with impulsive behaviors, perhaps acting without thinking, difficulties in accepting reality as it is, we want to teach distress tolerance skills. And we'll talk about all of these in the coming weeks. But keep in mind that behaviors that are reinforced will continue. And sometimes as counselors, therapists, people in the field, we forget to provide that positive reinforcement for every behavior or every skill that's practiced. So you want to make sure that you are positively reinforcing this person for their efforts, for their energy, for the commitment that they are doing to trying something different that might feel really uncomfortable, especially, again, if they were taught some of those behaviors that we mentioned in that invalidating environment, those behaviors were reinforced. So how can we help this person really challenge and shift into a new behavior and then reinforce them for that? I also find it helpful to keep in mind a few things, especially anytime you remove an old behavior, you want to replace it with a new one, whether it's smoking, binging, purging, restricting, substance use. You want to replace this behavior with a new behavior. And this is true for any skill, DBT or not. But sometimes we're taking something out of a person's life without the consideration of teaching them a new skill. And I find this happens quite often when working with students. You know, they are in grad school, they're so excited to learn all of these skills, they're ready to teach the clients that they serve, but they haven't added any behaviors into this person's life. So if this person is working on perhaps a harm reduction approach or reducing substance use or reducing smoking, if they are getting rid of something or getting rid of that substance, what can they do instead that still provides them with a sense of joy? It may not be the same feeling, it may not be exactly what they're looking for, but can they try something to replace it so that they don't feel kind of this lingering emptiness? New behaviors must be practiced, and that is true for ourselves as clinicians, counselors, therapists, counselors in training, wherever you are. For ourselves to practice some of these skills, as well as practicing with clients, encouraging clients to practice on their own. It may not work the first time, it may not work the fifth time. It may work the second time, but it may not work the 10th time. So we are constantly evolving and practicing. We want to also anticipate moments of difficulty and plan ahead, especially If we are teaching new skills and this person has an upcoming, let's say, encounter to engage with family, but family is really triggering for them, how can we cope ahead and plan some skills to prepare for this encounter rather than kind of sending this person off and hoping for the best? We want to set this client up for success by preparing for those really difficult, challenging, uncomfortable, distressing moments. Plan ahead and almost role play or play it out, like play that tape forward together in real time. Another piece as we're orienting someone to DBT is talking about pros and cons of using skills. Is anyone familiar with, this is very similar to the decisional balance worksheet or payoff matrix. This should look quite familiar if you have seen this. Yes, okay, great. And so this is specific to using skills. So in the beginning of orienting someone to DBT, anytime this person isn't sure whether they should or should not, or could not practice DBT skills, we want them to kind of write this out for themselves. What are the pros and cons of practicing those skills versus the pros and cons of not practicing skills? Because we want to help clients ultimately act skillfully in achieving their goals. So this can help clients decide whether they have anything to gain from practicing these skills. What are the good things that will happen if I practice these skills? What are the not so good things if I don't practice these skills? So we want to encourage clients to save this, put in their pocket, maybe use this and do it, over and over if you need with this person. But there is a specific worksheet, and I found it helpful to make like an index card version to keep this and take a picture, put it on this person's phone, have it in their wallet, put it in their pocket, just as a reminder of what it might look like to practice those skills. Because when we're working with people in introducing DBT, there's often many ways to solve a problem. And if a person is not interested in engaging in skills, you'll see a variety of ways that this person can solve a problem or solve a difficult situation or not. So the first piece here, this person can solve the problem by changing the situation. They can identify all the details of this problem. They can avoid, leave, get out of the situation, working on solving the problem that is causing them pain, stress, discomfort. What are some fears that clients have identified? So thinking about whether it's a fear or even a conflict, what are some fears that clients have when you're working with them? And I'll give an example just to kind of think this through. So let's say you have a client who has a fear of flying, but their goal really is to see their family. How would they be able to, let's say they avoided flying for the rest of their life, they would never see their family. So really exploring how they can solve this problem. Maybe that means, receiving treatment for gradual exposure for this fear of flying. If this person has conflict with a partner, maybe they're avoiding this partner. Maybe they're just thinking about, you know what, I'll just get a divorce. They're not going to talk to them. But could this person solve the problem through going to couples counseling? If they can't solve the problem, we can try to feel better about the problem. So you can teach this person how to use emotion regulation skills by changing or regulating your emotions or your emotional response to that problem. This person can also accept and tolerate the problem. So using distress tolerance skills, which we'll talk about next week. This person can also stay miserable. And I've, kind of outlined these options for problem solving very simply and matter-of-factly. This person can use no skills and make things worse. This person can use skills ineffectively. This person can use ineffective skills like substance use, engaging in disordered eating behavior, self-harm. So keep all of that in mind as we are working with someone. There's a few options that this person has. Can they solve the problem? If not, can they feel better about the problem? Can they accept and tolerate that distress for the moment? Perhaps there's no way to solve the problem in that moment. Alternatively, they can choose to stay miserable, stay suffering, make things worse. And we know the combination of pain and resistance often equals this suffering, but pain and acceptance results in freedom. So keep that in mind, and we'll talk about this next week. So looking at some of these skills, this is really just the overview of the 4 modules. And today we'll be talking about mindfulness in just a moment. As well as next week, we'll talk about distress tolerance, which really is the ability to tolerate and survive crisis situations without making them worse. And that includes crisis survival skills as well as reality acceptance skills to ultimately help reduce suffering. Emotion regulation, which enhances this person's ability to control their emotions, even though there's no real possible or feasible way to fully control your emotions. Marsha Linehan says that we are who we are to an extent, and emotionality is just a part of us. But we can learn how to understand, label, name, change our responses to emotions, manage really difficult emotions. And these skills we'll talk about, especially even with distress tolerance, the goal isn't to avoid your feelings and emotions forever, but to really get through difficult times. And then the last one is interpersonal effectiveness. So helping us maintain and improve relationships with family, friends, partners, loved ones, strangers, your cashier at the local grocery store. Okay. I know I'm moving fairly quickly through this, and I just want to save some time. Now we'll get into some of the skills piece. And again, just really a high level overview. But what comes to mind when you think of mindfulness? What is mindfulness to you? Yep, grounding skills, being in the present moment, paying attention, staying in the present moment. Nervous system regulation, yeah. Present and grounded, being present, noticing, yes. Meditating, observing oneself without judgment, being present, deep breaths, awareness. Slowing down, I like that one. Great. Yeah, so mindfulness skills really help us to focus our attention on the present moment without attachment, without judgment, and simply noticing when our mind wanders and doing our best to bring it back, not quieting or emptying the mind. Sometimes that is associated with meditation. But mindfulness really is the thread that runs through all of DBT, because a person cannot be successful in identifying their goals or identifying what skills to use or problem solving or improving their happiness without mindfulness. And so some clients will say, oh, I hate breathing. And maybe you're really providing some education that mindfulness is more than breathing. And so we'll talk about that in just a moment. And I like what I'm seeing in the chat, recognizing what your body needs and trying to fulfill it with positive actions. Awareness without judgment. Yes. I've seen a lot of DBT experts in the chat. All right. So just a high level overview of mindfulness, and this is really identical to the handout in the DBT skills training manual, and I'll share those resources at the end. And mindfulness is just a practice that has been so widespread, but teaches clients how to do some of the following. And what I really like to focus on is this experiencing reality as it is and being less judgmental. So this repeated effort of letting go of judgments, of letting go of attachment to those thoughts, emotions, sensations, feelings, events, life situations, and removing that judgment. Easier said than done. And so some of the core mindfulness skills, and we'll talk about a few of these, include wise mind, the states of mind, which includes reasonable mind, emotion mind, and wise mind. We'll talk about a few of the what skills, so what you do to be mindful. And then mindfulness how skills, so how you be mindful. And there's a few of these in each. So within the what skills, you have observe, describe, and participate. We'll talk about 2 of those. And then the how skills, so how you be mindful And there's one mindfully, non-judgmentally, and effectively. And we'll talk about one mindfully today. So the states of mind are really where experience lives within us. So we have these three states of mind: reasonable mind, emotion mind, and wise mind. And reasonable mind, are often identified as rational mind, is very logic driven, task focused, ruled by facts, logic, reason. 2 + 2 = 4 in any context, regardless of the context. And reasonable mind on its own or alone can allow us to lack empathy or compassion for ourselves and others. Emotion mind is very much mood driven or mood dependent. It's where we are ruled by our feelings, urges to do things. And facts and logic are just not important here. But without emotion, we lose connection to meaning. And then within our wise mind is really where our values lie. So it's really that wisdom within each of us, that kind of gut intuition. We're able to see both the reasonable mind and the emotion mind, kind of on both ends of the spectrum. And within that, our values come together to align with your preferences, your true morals, beliefs, and values. And so when we're helping someone access their wise mind, I find it helpful to encourage them to ask themselves the following question. So, is this something that my wise mind would do? Is this action, thought, or plan wise mind? If not, what can I do differently? Or how can I respond differently? Or what can I do to get through this difficult feeling or situation? So I'll share an example. If you are working with someone with an eating disorder, and this client values thinness, we are in a society that is driven by thinness. Ask them to identify some of their values. This person might value kindness, women's rights, self-care, health. And so I often say there needs to be this balance or this synthesis in between. So typically when someone says, okay, they value kindness, you might ask, or I would say, how might restricting align with their value of being kind to their body? It doesn't. Restricting doesn't align with being kind to your body because you're not providing your body with nourishment. So restricting might not be a wise mind decision. So there's a really great handout, and we'll talk about in our emotion regulation session about values and priorities. So helping clients explore their values to really help them get to that wise mind place. Okay. I'll save a few minutes at the end, hopefully, for questions. If not, we'll provide an email to reach out to me. But moving through this next piece, so another part of mindfulness include the mindfulness what skills. And as I mentioned, this includes observe, describe, and participate. And we'll talk about observe and describe. So again, this is what you do to be mindful. So with observing, we talk about encouraging clients to observe using the 5 senses. This might include observing with what they see, what they hear, what they smell, what they taste. Observing or just noticing your breath. With describe, you're now labeling that experience, describing what you see, maybe beyond, colors, shapes. You're now describing, you're seeing clouds in the sky. You can describe what you see in a painting. You can describe what you see as you're watching nature. Maybe you're describing your breathing. So, kind of saying out loud, I'm inhaling and I'm exhaling. And what I like to keep in mind is, or a thing to remember is, if you can't observe it, you can't describe it. But if you're working in a group setting, there's so many ways and fun activities to do with this one. So again, you might observe and describe an abstract painting. You might observe changes in music without judgment. You might provide activities like, simply observing a Where's Waldo activity. You might pass around postcards, look at flowers. You might, and this is this is an interesting one. But there's an example that Marsha Linehan shares on her in her manual about bringing lemons to a group and then encouraging or passing out lemons to each client in your group, asking them to simply notice this lemon. You take back the lemons, you put them in the basket, and you lie them across the front of the room, and you ask them to find their initial lemon, which can be quite the challenge. You can do this in many different ways. Some people like to do mindfulness with a raisin, piece of chocolate, keeping in mind the people that you're working with and their relationship with food. But this worksheet itself gives you so many additional examples of how to observe and how to describe. The last skill that we'll talk about here, again, in just brief, is how to be mindful. So when we talk about mindfulness how skills, we want to encourage someone to be completely present in this one moment. It's the here and now. At this moment, I'm doing just this one thing. I am talking to you here. I am looking at my presentation slides. I may have 500 other tasks to do. I may have a list of groceries that I need to go purchase. I may have documentation that needs to be completed, but I'm here talking to you. And so mindfulness really almost is the opposite of multitasking, and which really doesn't exist. But being mindful and doing one thing at a time allows us to really be present in our lives as to not miss out on our lives. Has anyone ever driven, let's say, just from point A to point B and had no clue how you got there, but somehow you managed to get there safely? Seeing lots of yeses. And I saw someone mention soft peppermints individually wrapped is my tool. That's a good one. Yes. Someone says, yes, me today. Yes, so we're kind of on this autopilot, almost highway hypnosis, really is, a level of dissociation because we are just simply moving through the motions instead of doing one thing at a time, which can be such a challenge. Cars and being on the road there's so many distractions, of course. You have to, watch the light. You may have a podcast playing and listening to music. Maybe you're someone who just gets all your phone calls in during your ride to work. But mindfulness and one mindfully specifically encourages us to do one thing at a time. So when you're eating, eat. When you're walking, walk. When you're driving, drive. When you're worrying, worry. And so think about even in the mornings, is there an opportunity for you to slow down? I know that there's only so many minutes in a day and we have so much to do. But I often find myself, and I'll share, even in the morning, I'm turning on my coffee. I'm sticking toast in the toaster. I'm going to put eggs on the stove. I am doing, feeding the cat at the same time. And instead of that, could I do one thing at a time? Could I simply just wait for my coffee to brew and just notice the smell of my coffee and hear the sound of my coffee pouring into my glass and noticing the smell of my creamer or noticing just the scents that are coming up for me? Maybe feeling the mug around my hands. And you're probably like, I don't have the time for that. But could you try? Is there an opportunity to try? And if not, it didn't work. If not, maybe there's another opportunity. Amy says, as I'm driving, listening to this and eating my lunch. I know we're constantly on the go. And if you live on the East Coast or if you're in New Jersey, we live in such a fast-paced environment. And even in the world we live in today, there's just this sense of immediacy. We need things now, we need them fast. Yeah. So a lot of this is just letting go of distractions, doing our best to just simply notice where we are, doing one thing at a time, allowing ourselves, even if there's one moment in the day, to do one thing at a time. Meanwhile, I'm here sitting with two laptops, a a screen projector, sticky notes, coffee, water, a phone. There's so many things that are constantly distracting us, but doing our best. I have a case study here, which I won't get to, just to share some resources and possibly answer a few questions. But feel free to take a look at this and maybe challenge yourself to explore how you might support this person. But I just want to summarize, and I know that there was a lot that we went through today, and I can really talk about DBT for hours, and this is just the first part, but want to highlight this emphasis on DBT being both supportive and validating, as well as behavioral and skill oriented. So having both a combination of acceptance and change. DBT does teach individuals the skills that are necessary to build a life worth living and to be effective for themselves, in their relationships with others, in their life. DBT does take time, energy, effort, and commitment. And in the following weeks, we'll talk more about skills. Today, we had to get through some just foundational pieces as it relates to DBT, but we'll take some more time to practice and look at some skills in detail. But really highlighting what we covered in brief today, mindfulness just helps this person focus their mind on the present moment without judgment, without attachment, simply noticing. I just try to equate mindfulness to noticing, simply noticing. And so what I want to encourage you all, your choice, as homework, as practice, as a take-home assignment, because it's so important that we practice the skills before educating clients on them so that we can give them and experience this full understanding. It's easier to, or it's actually really not as simple to educate someone on a skill when we haven't tried it ourselves. So whether it's trying, practicing a mindfulness what skill, a mindfulness how skill, or noticing those 3 states of mind, noticing when you're in emotion mind, wise mind, reasonable mind, noticing and taking a moment to, just be with one moment for yourself, observing and describing things around you for just a moment. What might that look like? And we'll explore, was it challenging? Was it difficult? Was it easy? Was it hard to let go of distractions, judgment? So your choice, taking a moment to practice any of those really shouldn't take more than a couple minutes just to notice. So encourage you to do this and practice this in your own time. Please do join us next Tuesday, June 11th, 12 to 1 Eastern Standard Time for part 2, which is DBT skills training strategies for distress tolerance, which is actually my favorite one of all time. I love distress tolerance skills the best. And I wanted to share a bunch of resources that were shared to me when I received my foundational training in DBT. So kind of this first one was identified as almost a Bible, for lack of better words, which was shared with me, as well as these DBT skills training manual. So this is, your teaching notes as well as the worksheets and handouts. I also was at a training once and someone shared this skills workbook for psychosis. And then if you're working with adolescents, these 2 at the bottom are really great. And then you have DBT for Linehan board certification if you're interested in being board certified, as well as behavioral tech, which is the website of Marsha Linehan and her colleagues, which includes information, explanations, resources for practitioners and clients. And then Rutgers actually has created some DBT videos on YouTube that are just quick, easy, accessible, digestible. So here's my email if you are interested in reaching out. I know that we are at our time. I will pass it over to Katy.
Thank you, Crystal. I appreciate such a wonderful webinar, and we have so much encouraging and positive feedback in the chat. Just a couple of questions that came into the Q&A, if you have a moment. Someone asked about, is DBT appropriate to use in one-on-one therapy, private practice, for example, with someone who is not diagnosed with borderline personality disorder?
Oh, absolutely. I find the skills to be so easily digestible accessible, tangible. I think I would encourage you to teach skills as often as you can. Of course, it's most effective in its traditional format, but as someone who also has worked in various levels of care and private practice as well, yeah, of course, more power to you.
Wonderful, thank you. So I have a couple questions that are coming about next week's webinar. I will email everyone a link to register if you haven't done so already, just so that you can also share with your colleagues. And as a reminder, we will email the certificate of completion within 7 days. In order to receive one, you must have participated at least 50 minutes in the training. And you will receive one to the email that you registered with, along with the link to download the presenter slides in PDF format, and also a link to the recording. So you can also share with your colleagues. We also have a library of training products and resources. I can share that with you as well about our upcoming webinars. And we also have a podcast called Toward Wellness and Recovery. You can find it either on Spotify, Apple Music, or Podbean. And our current series is Flourishing at Work, a plan for helping professionals. And we think we might also find it useful. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. We invite you to connect with us either through email or also follow us on our several social media outlets on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn at Northeast and Caribbean MHTTC. I want to thank Crystal once again, for providing us with such a wonderful webinar on the foundational knowledge on DBT. And we look forward to seeing your presentation again next week. And we want to thank everyone for your active participation. We really appreciate the engagement, the interactive engagement that you've had with our presenter during the webinar. We hope you have a, thank you. We hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for being here. See you next week.